Is there ancient indigenous evidence of anti-Brahminism?
First of all, the ancient epics and other writings were mostly written by Brahmins. And they are not so much about Brahmins, they are about Kshatriyas. They are about the elite. Now, you should see this in the ancient social reality. You had the Rajanyas or Kshatriyas. They had the power, they had not the money so much, but the means of getting that money. And so they employed the Brahmins for their purposes, namely as expert advisors, ministers, but originally as poets who had to sing the praise of the king. And so that's how the Vedas start. And it's what you see in the Puranas when they devote a lot of attention to making the king lists. You see, the absolute backbone of the Puranas is these king lists. And it's a red thread for history. You know, it's very difficult to do history unless you have this trail to follow. And so you have these king lists, and what they really are meant to do is to eternalize the king, to perpetuate him, you know, to give him undying glory. And so Brahmins, you know, become the habitual chroniclers and writers. And so they write about royal families. And the prime example, of course, is the war of succession in the royal house of Bharata. And so that's what the epic is about. Now, there you rarely hear the voice of ordinary people. You know, once in a while there is some poignant scene, but mostly not. And so if there was a popular anti-Brahminism, and I have never heard of it, if there was one, you know, probably it was never recorded, never written about. Now here I have to confess, you see, the great problem with Sanskrit literature is that there is so much of it. And I started too late in life to get to know it. So I think Indians are generally in a better position. So there are many writings that I just don't know about. And maybe there, you see, there is more such information. But I see little of anti-Brahminism except among the class that they did describe, namely the Kshatriyas. So there is some disparaging, you know, that Brahmins are poor and, you know, they just don't have the kind of power that the Kshatriyas have. Like in the description in the Chandogya Upanishad of the start of the doctrine of reincarnation, you see there is a Brahmin asking the king, you know, what happens after death? And the king says, well, we know, and you don't. We kings, we know, and that's why we have the power. Why? Because if you believe in reincarnation, you are braver and less scrupulous. Because if you die in the battlefield, well, you come back. You are reborn, as said among Kshatriyas in the Bhagavad Gita. And you're also less scrupulous because the other guy, whom you're going to kill on the battlefield, he will also be reborn. So it doesn't really matter. You can just go on killing and not be troubled by it. But so there is an air of contempt in that scene where the king explains, you see, we know the realities of life, even of, you know, the larger framework within which a human life takes place. But yeah, that's, you know, that's a matter of interpretation, perhaps. But you see the quarrel between Kshatriyas and Brahmins, perhaps the most vividly in the works of the Buddha. The Buddha, after all, is a Kshatriya. And on the one hand, he's a conservative. He wants religious customs to continue. He says so explicitly. All the pilgrimages, all the temples and so on that exist, he wants them to remain honored. It's not true that he was a revolutionary. But on the other hand, he does quite a few times rhetorically argue against Brahmins. And we assume that this is authentic. Of course, the Pali Canon was written down only 200 years after the Buddha. So a lot can happen in the meantime. But by and large, we assume that this is correct. It's also logical. There may well have been a certain animosity between Kshatriyas and Brahmins. And so the Brahmin source, which are the Shastras, that put Brahmins at the head, as the first, as the highest Varna, well, that may have been only the Brahmin perspective. You see, Kshatriyas very probably saw themselves as the most powerful, as being on top. So there you see there is a certain rivalry. I wouldn't call that enmity. I wouldn't call that anti-Brahminism. But certainly the Brahmins had certain rights and certain duties, and that may have created jealousy or animosity like you have between any two human groups. Apart from that, I don't, I mean, if you believe the Dalit movement and so on, anti-Brahmanism should have existed since the beginning. But I don't know of any trace of that.